Welcome, everyone, to today's webcast. I am Paul Asadorian. I'm the CEO and co-founder, and founder, actually, of Security Weekly. I apologize. I'm a little under the weather. We just got back from DEF CON and Black Hat. Actually, not just, but we're still, a lot of us are under the weather from going to the conferences. But, as they say, the show must go on. So it will today on our webcast is phishing. There's a sucker born every minute. I'm excited about this webcast because... first and foremost, Matt Alderman, who is also with Security Weekly and Layered Insight, is kind enough to join us for the analysis, the Security Weekly analysis portion of the program today. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. Always a pleasure.
And then I am excited to announce Braden Preston. I've just met Braden, and I like him already because it's the same name as my first son. So, Braden, you're cool. And it's still weird saying your name because I feel like I'm talking to my son. Braden Preston from Endgame is here with us. Braden, welcome.
Hey, thanks a lot, Paul. I'm glad to be here with you guys today.
And you're filling in for someone else who became ill. Is that?
I am, yeah. My boss, actually, our vice president of product, Mike Nichols, was going to do this call, but he also fell ill out at Black Hat. Didn't spend any time at DEF CON, so I'm not too sure what his real excuse is. But he's not going to be on here today, so you get to deal with me.
So, Braden, what's your role at Endgame?
Yeah, my role at Endgame is I'm our director of product. So okay. I run our product team and our delivery teams working directly with Mike.
Now, this is kind of a big deal because you guys have a pretty big announcement. I don't know if you've made the announcement in other outlets previously, but I'm assuming we can talk about it freely now because I've known about it for a little while. I just haven't talked about it yet.
Yeah, you might as well. Go ahead.
So they've built in some phishing protections into the endpoint product. And at first I was like, really? Tell me more. And when they did, I was like, oh, that's really cool. We got to use that in a webcast because that's really awesome. And I think it really fills a gap, especially when we talk about document style phishing, which there's a gap in the market that we'll cover. And Braden, you have a demo as well, a live demo. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly right. So I'll walk through a little bit here in a minute or two, or maybe 20 minutes or so, kind of what we do from a slideware perspective on how we stop document-based phishing attacks. And then I'm not scared. I'm going to show you it live in the product and actually working right here on the podcast.
Awesome. Alrighty. Hopefully you can see the slides now. My HDMI cable was jiggling a little bit. Okay. So, excuse me. This is the agenda. Phishing, what is it? Why do we care? Right? This has been a problem for a really long time. I remember working for a university, and I don't know if it was the Melissa virus or the I love you virus that came out first. That's a pretty good trivia question, right? But I remember everyone freaking out about that, and that was our email-borne phishing and email-borne malware. It was a huge problem, and all of a sudden all of our attention focused on trying to stop spam and phishing attacks. So this has been a problem for some time. We're going to talk about some approaches to prevent it. Matt, I liked your high level. Matt's got a great high level overview of the basic categories of different approaches. As I've learned that Matt is really good at analyzing a category and coming up with the three approaches inside of that category. This is the second time you've done this very well, Matt. Well done. So we're going to talk about that. I've got a slide on the tactics, right? So everything that I've learned from doing briefings, being a practitioner, working with some of our sponsors, such as Endgame and others that are involved in email phishing protection in some way, the approaches that I really like. And then, of course, Braden is going to show how we can tackle this problem with respect to document phishing on the endpoint side, which is totally awesome, I promise. So, Matt, you want to kick us off and just kind of lay the foundation for phishing?
Yeah, phishing, it's a noun. The fraudulent practice of sending emails purporting to be from reputable companies in order to induce individuals to reveal personal information such as passwords and credit cards. As Paul said, this is a problem we've been fighting for a long time. People trying to fool you into being legitimate to get information about you that they can use to either steal more data or your credentials to gain access to systems. It's been one of these problems that's been out there for a long time. Good succinct definition of phishing.
And you know what's fun? What I think is kind of interesting, Matt, is that a lot of us, even outside of security, people who have gone through security awareness training are like, there's no way that I'd fall for a phishing attack. Even a lot of us in security are like, we're not going to fall for a phishing attack. But then social engineering enters into it, and it gets really hard not to fall for a phishing attack, such as, hey, Paul, someone updated the Wikipedia page about you. Why don't you click this link and go check it out? And so, like, instinctively, you're like, and I'm like, oh, no, I shouldn't click on that because my friend's just messing with me. And then penetration testers will tell you there's some tried and true methods to get a very high success rate, right? Spoofing an email that looks like it's coming from FedEx saying, hey, click this link so you can retrieve your package. Like, everyone loves to receive packages. Like, it's like Christmas, right? Like, you're getting a gift. I want my gift. Someone sent me a package. I want to go get it, right? So we can prey on some of these human tendencies and really increase the chances that a phishing attack, especially a targeted phishing attack, is going to be successful.
Yeah, and this has evolved over time. In the early days, it was kind of the spam phishing. Now they've become much more sophisticated, much more targeted, where if it looks like it's coming from your HR department and it's got a link or a document in it, well, why wouldn't I click it? It's my HR department, So there have been a lot of successful attacks, very focused, that look much more real than the early phishing attacks did. And as we get into the document protection side, I think that gets really interesting, because if it looks like it's from HR and they're like, review your comp plan, and you open up the Excel spreadsheet and it has a bunch of malicious macros in it,
right?
You've been phished. Right?
In a very targeted attack, and I'll point to a great piece of content. Chris Hadnaghi, the social engineering expert, of course. You can infiltrate systems and then use phishing on top of that. So the email could come from HR, and he showed this very quick demo to the press at Black Hat, and I happened to see the Black Hat or DEF CON, and I happened to see the clip. It was basically one of his social engineers. She was female. She put a video of a crying baby in the background, called up the cellular provider. Now, the journalist was on the other side, and they were going to steal the journalist's cell phone number and password, right? And she called him up. She said, baby's on the crying in the background, and I'm just trying to reset my PIN or do it for. And she made up this whole story. She reset his PIN and reset his password for the website in a matter of 3 minutes. Now she has access to that person's account. So now, when you do phishing, it can come from internal, which we'll talk about. And that only took maybe 3 minutes of social engineering on the phone and a YouTube video of a baby crying. In my house, I probably wouldn't really need the video, but So Matt, you've got some statistics here to talk about.
Yeah, I pulled up some statistics, and why do we still care about phishing, right? Phishing's been around for 20 years in some form or fashion. Mm-hmm. Look, basically, it still works. It's still a very effective attack vector. And if you look at some of the different metrics, right? PhishMe had a report out, says phishing attempts have grown by 65% in the last year. These attacks aren't going away because they work. If they didn't work, we wouldn't see an increase in the number of phishing attacks coming. The Wombat Security says 76% of businesses reported being a victim of a phishing attack in the last year. That's increasing, which means people are clicking on the links or opening the files, right? So we can talk about security awareness and education, but look, this stuff is still happening. The Verizon data breach investigation report, 30% of phishing messages got opened by targeted users, and 12% of those users click on the malicious attachment or link. That's significant because, again, this is that main entry point into a lot of these accounts. This is one of the main vectors to get in and then start to move laterally. And then I thought this last one was kind of interesting. Many, if not all, of your employees are unlikely to be able to spot a phishing email. According to Intel, 97% of people around the world are unable to identify a sophisticated phishing email, which means the emails themselves are much better crafted. They are hiding them. And that's why people keep clicking on the links and open the attachments. Just some really good stats to support. Why we care.
I don't have any stats to back this up, but I did read an article a couple of weeks ago that basically said, since Adobe Flash has been removed from so many people's computing devices, largely websites are not relying on Flash anymore. Flash is essentially pretty much, dead at this point. I think there is still some usage out there. However, organizations are very aware of that. The browsers are very aware of that. What they claim that was the shift was, and I think they used some phishing attacks to get people to click on a link that then had some Adobe exploits embedded in the site that they were going to. I think they also went through measures to put Adobe Flash exploits in random places on the web. Maybe that's targeted in a forum. Maybe that's targeted on YouTube comments or wherever it is. And they were using Adobe Flash to basically exploit people because it was so vulnerable. There were so many exploits and nobody was updating it. Now that that's dead, the theory is that the focus has shifted back to targeted phishing like this. And I think that our numbers here on the slide, Matt, support that, right? That these kind of drive-by exploits, while still might be using other mechanisms, as technology goes away, the attackers have to shift. And if phishing's working, they're going to stick with phishing. If we find a magic bullet to stop all phishing, they're going to move back to some other drive-by exploit. So I thought that was pretty, kind of relevant to our conversation, that attacks will shift based on the technology available to them.
Yeah, and they'll get more sophisticated because the basics we're going to block when we talk about some of the approaches. They've blocked certain things, but look, there's still ways to get in. There's still ways to exploit these environments, so they are going to continue to use them.
So Matt, talk about the major approaches, and some of these are pretty new. In fact, there's a lot of innovation, especially in the sandboxing area, I think.
Yeah, I kind of broke these down and said, okay, if I think about phishing, there's kind of three buckets I would normally put these in, right? We have our signature-based approaches, which we're using to detect malicious domains, detect malicious malware. Signatures have been used for a long time in the prevention side. They have some level of effect, right? If we've seen the exploit before and somebody's had a chance to analyze it and build a signature for it, we can effectively block those. And we see this in our email spam filters and all the other things that we have today. So it provides a level of protection, but by itself, it's not enough, right?
We know also, Matt, we were talking earlier how a signature could just be a file type. If anyone uses Gmail or G Suite, try and send someone an executable. It doesn't work. Yeah. Sometimes even zipping it, that doesn't work. So they've basically cut. that was a big thing 15, 20 years ago. We're well, wait, we can't stop people from sending executables. Now it's become such a problem that we're yeah, no, you can't. I end up using thumb drives and things, or going through drastic measures to obscure my .exe to send it, through Gmail.
Right. So, yeah, signatures have their place, but they're only so effective, right? Mm-hmm. Then we saw this evolution of the sandboxes, right? Can we look at a malicious attachment and understand what it's doing in a safe sandbox environment? And we've seen a lot of evolutions in different sandboxing technologies. But also, the attackers have gotten a little more sophisticated, right? They're looking for specific things in the sandboxes to detect, are they running in a sandbox or not? So they're trying to hide aspects of the exploits in these sandboxes. But they were a way early on in malware to kind of look at, is this thing going to try to do something malicious before I let it open fully on the host and potentially get exploited? So sandbox has kind of evolved here over the past few years. Again, pretty effective in certain cases, but again, not the end-all, be-all protection. Sure.
There's a lot of innovation, too, Matt, in the sandboxing space as well. There's a lot of companies doing, well, not a lot. I would say there's a few companies in the sandbox space that are startups that are really trying to innovate in the space and emulate, not even emulate, but create hypervisor environments to detonate the malware in. And following instruction sets. So there's some innovation in the sandboxing space happening as well.
Yeah, and then we kind of go into that third category around machine learning and artificial intelligence. Is can we start to understand aspects of the malware, characteristics of the malware, sources of where some of the stuff is coming from, and use that in a machine learning, artificial intelligence way to do a better job of saying, whoa, this is malicious. We shouldn't allow this file to execute or get downloaded and stored on the file, right? So we're going to see this continual evolution, I think, in the machine learning AI side. I think we'll see a little bit of this with the endgame solution here in a bit, but we're trying to figure out how to apply some of this machine learning, artificial intelligence to the space and provide yet another layer of protection here when the other two approaches don't work, right? I didn't stop it at my spam filter. I didn't stop it in the sandbox, but it's still malicious. Can I now apply this third technique and provide even that much more protection from phishing attacks?
So now we get to some of the tactics, and I think a lot of these tactics are really cool, and I tried to only put like the really cool ones on here because obviously there's a lot of things, as Matt was covering, you know, that you can do to stop phishing attacks from getting into your environment. End user security awareness and training is certainly one of them, which ties into our first point here, which is allowing users to flag suspicious phishing emails. This is often accompanied by some type of security awareness and or training program that has a reward-based system. In other words, there's solutions that you train your users up for what to look for, right? When an email comes in, they've got a button in their email program that goes, that message looks like a phishing attack to me. The process after that is automated, right? And I think a lot of people's practices before that were, hey, if you get a phishing email, like forward it to, you know, security and wait for someone to do something. Now a lot of the solutions today can say the user can just click a button. And if they find a successful phishing attack, they can get some kind of reward. You know, we've had Masha Sadova on the show and talked a lot about security training and awareness and things that are effective. A reward is effective, right? Depending on how the program is structured. So that to me was something that I think works really well. And you're not going to catch 100%, right, in that scenario. Because your users are always going to get fooled, or, you know, do you make everyone go through the program before they even get an email account? Like, likely they have an email account, and like next week I'm going for my security training and, you know, an awareness thing. So that was my first one. The second one on here, known phishing emails are then removed from users' inboxes. So let's say in our scenario, I get an email and I push the button and I go, that's definitely phishing. And it gets sent off to some kind of automated system. Someone verifies that, yes, that is a valid phishing attack. They can click a button that goes, now, if any other user's inbox has this email, just take it right out of their inbox. So if someone's not at their desk, someone's away or whatever, they're not coming back, they never see that message. It's been removed by the system. And I don't think it's deleted in these systems, right? It's put in a place where you can go get it if you want to. But I think that removing it from people's systems is something that is table stakes today. That would, again, I go back to when I was working for a university. You know, I started there in 2001. I didn't have a lot of this fancy technology to go, oh yeah, when we get a phishing attack, just remove it from everyone's inbox automatically. If we did have that technology, we didn't trust it. Today, I think it's table stakes. I really like the predictive analysis that blocks phishing domains before the emails are even sent. So if I receive an email, it somehow gets flagged as some kind of phishing attack, right? Maybe I do some kind of domain statistics. There's systems out there that will look at the profile of that domain, and maybe that's as simple as the phone number that was used to register that domain, which is clearly phishing, was used to register 50 other domains. And oh, by the way, pull me a list of those 50 other domains and then go tell my spam filter or firewall or DNS, however you want to block it. Now, any new phishing attacks that come from those domains, you're already blocked. So I like the predictive analysis because it gets ahead of the attacker, which is awesome. Now, you're using, in all of these scenarios, we talked about some level of automation and orchestration, right? And I didn't kind of paint the picture that that's the solution that you would use. But in each one of those three examples, right, the user flagging it, known phishing emails are removed, and having the predictive analysis, all of that can be automated with your SOAR platform. There's a lot of providers that will include some automation in their phishing protection, and that's a personal decision, right? Do you want to do your automation and orchestration in a platform designed for that, or do you want to have a solution that has some automation and orchestration built in? When you're looking at the phishing problem, it very much lends itself to having some kind of automation and orchestration. And I don't mean that every time a user clicks the button, it automatically removes that email from everyone's inbox and goes and blocks all the domains. There's humans and lots of checking that goes in there. Typically, you're validating the attack from multiple sources before it gets to a human that can make the decision, and the human pushes the button, it takes the actions, and then documents those actions in your ticketing system to let your help desk know that, hey, there was a phishing attack. We just removed 1,000 emails from people's inboxes. If they call up, here's everything that happened. So I love the SOAR products for tackling this problem. The last one is a lot of these solutions, even the ones I spoke about, are external, coming internal phishing attacks. Now, in my previous example, what happens if I social engineer my way in or I leave a thumb drive somewhere? I'm into a system and I can send phishing emails internally. That might not be caught by your phishing protection mechanisms and could be very successful if you're not looking at stuff internally inside of your email environment. So, Matt, Braden, thoughts or comments on kind of these tactics that I've collected over the past couple of years?
I like them.
Yeah, there are a lot of really good tactics here. The part up front, making sure that users are sufficiently trained to identify and understand what a phishing email looks like is incredibly important in this. And the incentive-based programs seem to work pretty well, when something hits an inbox. But again, these things up front and then even stringing them all together are imperfect in some respects. You're going to get users that start clicking, which is why kind of that bottom line, being able to block attachments that are trying to move laterally or trying to execute in the environment is a huge part of this overall equation, no matter how much training you're putting in forth or other technologies.
Yeah, Braden, that's an excellent analysis. Like, if all this stuff worked 100% of the time, attackers would be doing stuff different from phishing. Matt already showed us. And if you talk to any penetration tester, right, I have a lot of friends that run some of the top pen test firms in the world, they'll all tell you that phishing is the way that they get into the organization. So if all this stuff really did work, the pen testers wouldn't be saying that, and the reports wouldn't be pointing to that that's how attackers are getting in. But these are good for preventing a large majority of the attacks, so it's not a much bigger problem in your environment. Which I think is a great segue into Endgame's announcement and enhancements to their product suite to help us with this problems, because we know that even with all the protections we have today, a user's going to get an attachment and they're going to click on it and they're going to open it, right? I mean, there's so many ways to compel a user to do that. It's going to happen, and then what? So, Braden, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, guys. I really appreciate you, again, inviting me on here, and appreciate being able to spend time with those of you who have dialed in. And I know some of our current customers have dialed in, and maybe some prospective customers have dialed in, or people just looking to understand, what the industry is doing to help solve this phishing problem. So more stats here really to start, and the numbers here and that we showed earlier kind of sliced a little bit of a different way, focus kind of what's happening in the enterprise arena with the numbers that you're seeing on this screen. And not to beat the point to death, but that those first set of stats, only 54% of employees, enterprise level employees who are getting trained, who understand for the most part the risks in infecting their enterprise, can actually recognize what a phishing email looks like. And that's because when we talked about it a little bit, the attackers, these are in most cases targeted like attacks, who are doing their due diligence and their social engineering to understand what you or your organization cares about. And there's a lot of things that are pretty common across all individuals and things that they care about, like their children's schools or their 401k accounts or other bank accounts, potential, mortgage letters or emails and other sorts of things that universally people are going to get excited about and be tempted to click. And attackers know this, and that's how they're framing a lot of these attacks, and targeted at kind of broader swaths of individuals. But they're also doing their overall reconnaissance on the organizations that they're targeting. What are the internal tools that you in your company are using? And are you a software development shop that is using GitHub, for example, and I'm able to maybe spoof a GitHub email or something like that that's going to entice you to go review some code or to commit some code or something like that, just to get you to click. I mean, their whole goal in life is to get you to click a link, get you to click an attachment, so that attachment will run. And whether you're
Brandon, I think that credential phishing is something we haven't talked about, which is pretty popular, right? Like, I get the email that looks like it's from Google that says authorize via OAuth this app. That was a very successful phishing style attack because it wasn't asking you for your password. It was just asking you, hey, can this app connect? And OAuth is essentially giving that application some kind of credentialed access to your account. And, we've seen a lot of different phishing people for passwords because you're a developer of a Chrome extension. Yeah. Now I get phished for my password, and the attacker takes over that Chrome extension, and hey, they can own 20,000 users because that's how many people have my Chrome extension installed. So there's some really targeted credential ones that are very interesting.
Yeah, we haven't hit on the credential stuff all that much, but it's a very common attack. I'm sure that in the audience that's listening, 90% of us have seen an email come through that looks fishy. I guess no pun intended there, but something that you're going to want to click, and then you get to this login screen that says do something. Enter your creds, and before a switch flips in our mind, or maybe it doesn't, then maybe I shouldn't put something in. So it's a problem, right? Only 54% of enterprise employees can recognize that something looks like a phishing email, and of that 54%, again, we talked about this. They're going to click, whether it's mindlessly clicking. You're just getting through your email in a day and, you're just kind of clicking. Everybody's busy, not really paying close attention, or that well-crafted email or message really hits home for you and you're going to click and then get your credentials stolen, download a payload that it gets executed that infects your laptop, your machine, and then gives the attacker the ability to move laterally across the environment and what eventually formulates into a successful attack. And then once you have that successful attack, right, that campaign that started with phishing, and we talked about most campaigns do, and they're pretty successful. Everybody has heard this metric, right? The adversary is able to linger around in the environment and do what they need to do for, on average, 100 days or more in these cases. And that's where we really start to see the pain being inflicted, right? It's not the fact that you downloaded the attachment, right? That to you as the user, okay, I did it, I made a mistake, but the pain comes now that adversary is in your environment. What can they do, right? And then are they stealing your organization or your company's proprietary information? Are they looking to cause some level of damage in some destructive damage? We've got other webinars and podcasts and things we talk about, the rise of destructive types of attacks, ransomware, just completely wipers that'll just wipe your machines or take you offline for some period of time. In order to clean those up, this is where the pain really hits at the organization level. It's expensive to clean these things up, to go in, to hire consultants or do an IR engagement to come in. And then the overall, once you have to report a breach, the goodwill you lose with your not only your employees and your customers, but shareholders, stakeholders, et cetera, results in a significant dip in the overall company reputation, and that hits you in the stock market, right? The stat you see here is when you get phished and that targeted attack is successful, lingers around, typically you see about a 15% loss in overall market cap, and that's something that the CISOs and CEOs and even average shareholder feels in their pocketbook. So phishing, I guess, kind of in short here, is in everyone's problem within an organization. You've got to worry about it at home. The security team at your company has to worry about it, and they've got to put in, we talked about the signature-based detections or the sandboxing detections. Those things have to be in place, but they're not always going to be effective. You're not going to be able to stop a user from opening, your Gmail and downloading an attachment that came through Gmail while you're at work, or maybe you're hanging out on Facebook and somebody sends you an attachment via Facebook Messenger, or you click a link that somebody posted that goes off and is able to fool you into stealing credentials. No matter how much training and current technologies we put in place, it's kind of a holistic problem. And Endgame's prevention of malicious attachments coming from email through our analysis, our machine learning analysis, is a huge part of that equation. And so the next slide.
Brandon, I think you bring up a great point too. It's not just email phishing, right? I've seen a lot of Facebook Messenger scams. Slack is a way that you could also distribute files. I mean, there's a Google Drive, right? There's a ton of different ways in which a user can obtain a file. It doesn't necessarily have to be through email either.
The other thing here, just quickly, is it's not just the money. I mean, people are starting to lose their jobs over some of these breaches now. It's become a little more impactful to the security teams and executives who are not protecting their environment. Yeah, dollar play, but also, people are losing their jobs over some of this. So I think that's just another interesting piece for people to realize.
Well, yeah, and I think the Equifax breach was certainly a shining example of that. Not only people lose their jobs, but due to insider trading, they're being prosecuted as well. So it was like one of the worst scenarios. Not that was email phishing born, but still, the result of a breach is bad.
And we talk about these attackers, right? These guys or ladies or whoever, whether they're sitting in a high rise somewhere with a huge team behind them, or they're down in the bowels of a basement. Your typical hacker with a hoodie. They know how to craft these emails or other Facebook messages, Messenger links, Slack messages to get you to click. It's what they do, and it's such a cheap thing to do in terms of if you fail once, maybe you burn a domain or an IP, but those are easily acquired, easily come by to try again. So they're able to learn over time, success rates they have with certain campaigns or certain things they're trying to do to get basically delivered right in front of a user. Probably the easiest way to get somebody's attention is to send them an email or a Facebook post or a Twitter message or whatever it happens to be. You're living in that person's machine then, and all they have to do is click. So kind of pivoting into how Endgame helps solve this problem. What we did was we built a machine learning model that identifies the malicious macro or the malicious code that's embedded inside of a document. So if somebody gets an email, that email has a Word doc or maybe an Excel file or some other document, and the user clicks on that if successful is going to execute and do something malicious on that end system. And it's typically a macro in those documents when you're speaking about Office documents type of things. So what we've been able to do is identify that malicious payload, and we analyze it with the machine learning model to determine whether or not it's malicious or not. And in order to do that, we had to spend a ton of time and energy curating samples from every place we could get our hands on samples of malicious macros. And that sounds, maybe to say it in words, a little bit trivial, but there are not as many malicious macro samples in the world as there are PE files or portable executable files. So identifying whether or not a macro is malicious, being able to understand what it tries to do. Our experts sit down, we expertly label these files, determining what they're doing to build this model that is extremely effective in identifying malicious content within a macro. And in fact, we've been independently tested. Our model, and I'll show a screenshot of this in a little bit, is available for you to test in VirusTotal. We're really big on transparency in what we're doing and what we're delivering to our customers. You could test this for yourself, but it's greater than 99% effective in identifying and stopping that malicious payload that's embedded inside of a document.
Now, Braden, but when you make that claim, and you may have slides that talk about this later too, but I think about, are there legitimate uses for macros still in use today? And if there are, how common are they? And then the big question is how do you tell the difference, right, between a malicious macro and something that has to be there for something to function?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't have a slide on it, so I'm glad you asked. Macros still have a place in today's enterprise environments, whether it's your finance team who is building their financial models in Excel spreadsheets, that maybe date back, the same macros maybe date back 10 years or so that they've been using these things. So you can't, one of the solutions that is proposed often in security remediation steps is, hey, you should just update your corporate policy to not allow macros to run. You can do that in Word or Excel or whatever it happens to be. Just don't ever let macros run. But that's an impact to the business at that point. If your finance team either has to rebuild everything, all their formulas, all their calculations over a long time, or not work at all, that's an impact to your business. And I think one thing we found in the security industry is you can build the best protections in the world. And at Endgame, I believe we do. But if you impact your end user from doing their job, you're going to be kicked out pretty darn quickly.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to get a whole lot of tolerance from the user community within an enterprise before the IT ops shop says, look, you're consuming too much performance, or my finance team can't work with you guys installed. They'll kick you out pretty quickly, which is why it's important to not take or understand the impact to the business of the remediation or the policies you put in place. And sometimes those hammers of, hey, we're just going to turn off all macros isn't viable in modern enterprises.
Mm.
And
the business is tired of security always telling them no, right?
Yeah.
So how do you say yes with a level of protection?
Yeah, for us security guys, we would just turn everything off and not allow you to connect to the network, and everything would be perfect. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. But that's not the world we live in, obviously.
So then how do you differentiate between the good macro, a good air quote macro that finance team is using, and a malicious macro? I mean, it's about function calls. It's about give me a high level on the analysis.
Yeah, I mean, function calls are part of it. What it's in what we've labeled in terms of the different feature sets. We're able to call out. Are there certain capabilities within this file that may be indicative of calling out to the internet, for example, or is it trying to hook a particular API that a macro typically shouldn't be able to do? There's 500 plus labels that we've applied to this, and 500 plus of those feature sets that we've applied, and any combination of those things will reach, in our machine learning model, reach a score. So we scored on a scale of 0 to 100. 100 being, we think it's really darn bad. We need to block this outright. 0 meaning, yeah, it's good, just something your finance team has legitimate purpose to use. So those feature sets, and it's kind of like a Rubik's Cube of feature sets and which ones combine and match and that sort of thing, really determine the level of maliciousness of a file and how we make the decision whether or not to block it. I think the other thing that's pretty important to understand in the approach we've taken at Endgame is we do all this autonomously on the endpoint. So something that's really important to understand, and I may have a slide on this later on, but I'll mention it here briefly, and then if we do, we'll dive in deeper later. We analyze that file and make the decision autonomously on the endpoint in pre-execution. So we don't have to analyze the behavior of the file. We understand by just looking at the features of that particular file. And that's really important because when you are doing behavioral-based analysis, or maybe like a cloud lookup for a signature or reputation score or something, you are giving the attacker the ability to execute code at some level. Maybe it's just a few instructions, maybe it's a handful of instructions, but you're still letting them execute code. And when you allow an attacker to execute code, that's when you give them the opportunity to bypass your solution. And time and time again, we see this happening where, just the third instruction within a malicious payload can bypass security technologies. We could probably move to the next slide unless there are other questions or comments we want to make on this one. Yeah. So here's what.
Sorry, Brad. I was just going to ask.
Yeah.
Given what you just said, that you're in the flow of execution is important because many of us may take a signature of that document and send it up to a virus total, wait for a response and say, is it good or bad? Yep. I think conversation we had previous to this was there's not a whole lot of document samples that are out there on these services today.
Yep.
And just taking the hash of it isn't necessarily a good idea. So kind of compare and contrast, that approach of taking a hash with blocking on the actual endpoint.
Yeah, not only the hash of the document, right? So if you take a hash, let's say you get a Word document delivered. This is a demo I'll do in a little bit, but you get a Word document delivered to your inbox. You can take the hash of that Word document. The chances of that document with that malicious payload in it being the same across everywhere is pretty low, right? So the piece of malicious code is that macro or that VBA script that's embedded inside that.
Yeah, because the document content can be randomly generated, so the hash is always different. So that approach
exactly right.
doesn't work.
So using signatures for this type of embedded script really is completely ineffective.
And now I get concerned if we take the other approach, and whenever I say, okay, let me take the whole document, let me send that up to a service. But what if that's a legitimate document with like all the financials for my company or something? Like it could be a sensitive document, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, I mean and you hear about things like that all the time, right? Where information is leaked through reputation service checks. I send files to VirusTotal or some other third-party reputation service. I'm sending the whole file. There could be employee PII information in there. There could be your financials, like you mentioned. It's not always an incredibly safe bet to just start randomly sending files to a third-party service.
Awesome.
Yeah. So how we stop phishing? I mean, that model that we talked about earlier and how we built it, and Paul, you hit this on the head. Like finding the number of samples required to generate a machine learning model was a large part of this challenge, and why I think maybe we're the first to do it in the industry is because the amount of time that we had to spend on research and R&D to continue to innovate and find a new innovative solution to solving the phishing problem. I would imagine that people are going to look at this and say, wow, that's a brilliant idea. Maybe we'll start to see the industry grow in terms of using machine learning to identify malicious macro content. And I hope that for our industry, we're able to do that, which is why we put our model in VirusTotal and let people check it out and test it and see how effective we can be.
And I love that, Braden, because we of course a joke in the industry about machine learning. But those following along, I've heard some keywords from Braden that make it seem like it's not just a buzzword, right? Like when you talked about having 500 labels, it's a lot of work to be able to profile macro code to have all those labels. And then you talked about kind of like the Rubik's Cube. It's kind of like the decision tree. Like if these exist and this exists, then give it a score. And that's true machine learning, right? And also we're not talking about artificial intelligence because people mix those terms up all the time. And it was actually Hiram from Endgame is one of your data scientists to help clarify and level set everyone on what we're talking about. So I don't want people to look at it as a buzzword because we've already heard from Braden that in the execution and how this is working is actually truly first a good application of machine learning and executed correctly.
Yep.
Sorry,
so
I was just
it's all
validating
about the models at the end of the day.
Go ahead.
That's great. Yeah, it is all about the models and the work you put into the model, right? Really pays dividends on the other side. So I won't kind of belabor this point. Hopefully, it's coming in clear on the webcast here. This is the sample that I'm going to detonate live for you here in a moment, and just to give you kind of an idea of how hard this problem is. This sample truly is malicious. If we were to allow it to run in my demo, you would see it call out to its C2, try to bring back a malicious payload to then execute further. We are the only ones who have their models in VirusTotal that effectively stop this. People that have been doing this a long time, again, maybe they don't analyze this type of file, or their machine learning algorithm isn't good enough to identify it. But I hope everybody on this screen turns red, for this file and these types of files in the future. And this file is actually pretty interesting. It's been floating around in VirusTotal, in fact, for since 2015.
Wow.
It has been scanned multiple times, and finally when we got our model put up there just before the Black Hat conference, so 2 weeks ago, the first vendor to flag it as malicious. And that's what I'm going to demo for you live.
Are most of the documents a dropper like that? Like they're putting just enough macro code in there to act like a dropper to download something else?
So some will execute maliciously right there. So now they're not all the droppers. Some are, some aren't. It depends on kind of the size that you're trying to send. The dropper is usually pretty lightweight to go download its capabilities. And sometimes they'll download capabilities and embed them right back into that document. If you have it'll come in, which is what this file did. So you're still living within the Office ecosystem. I mean, it might be weird that Word is calling out to the internet in your environment, but sometimes it does. It download updates, whatever it has to do.
Yeah.
Fonts.
Well, of course, if the detection rate was pretty low, the attackers weren't working really hard to obfuscate what
Right.
they were doing because they didn't have to.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully, they have to change their tactics, right?
Exactly.
So, did you want to move to demo next? Sorry. Yeah.
We'll go straight to the demo yet. So, I'll, as the slide indicates, so I'll pull the screen. I'll share my screen here now, and hopefully,
we'll do the magic of the production.
Yep.
Switching, and that'll become full screen in just a moment. So,
sure.
Braden and audience, just kind of hang with us. Johnny's gonna work on switching that from my lap. There we go.
Yeah.
You can make that full screen too, Johnny. I don't know if you have the capability to make it full screen. See, we can lose our video for the demo portion if you can work on that. Braden, continue while John works on that.
Yeah, sure. So, what hopefully everybody can see on the screen here is Endgame's user interface. I'm logged in, and me as a security analyst using Endgame, this is the screen that'll be up on the big screens in the SOC or on your desktop as you're navigating through Endgame. And while those excellent security analysts that are doing their job and using Endgame, you've got poor innocent John McClain here who is getting ready to retire, and he gets this email that's dropped in his inbox that says, "Hey, John, we received a request to terminate your 401k. Here's the document. All you got to do is fill it out, sign it, and send it back to us." And again, like as we talked about before, it's a pretty well-crafted email. It makes sense that maybe he's a Fidelity customer. Maybe there's a glitch in the system. I didn't really want to terminate my 401k. So now I'm going to update and open this document. And as I open it, you see that Endgame immediately stops that file from opening. And we stop it so fast, in fact, and we talked about this pre-execution before, right? Before that file is able to open, we stop it so fast, in fact, that Word is unable to identify the file. So the slide we talked about earlier, where we not only do we prevent that file from opening, we would also stop it as it's trying to get written to disk. And Word can no longer find this file because we've safely and securely quarantined it, where only the analyst using Endgame can access that file, either pull it back down for further analysis, completely delete it from the system. And then, so if I come back to Endgame, I see that I get an alert.
So hold on, Brandon. I want to go back to what I think is a very important point. As John McClain gets this email and he's downloading the attachment, as the attachment is getting written to disk, the Endgame agent is analyzing the code, and even before it gets completely written to disk, it's already flagged in a malicious macro.
That's exactly right. So we flag it in two areas. We flag it on write. So as it's getting written to disk, we would identify the fact that it was malicious and then quarantine it. If the file was already on disk and was attempted to be opened, we would flag it on open as well. So we do it both ways, so you're protected in both manners.
And then what prevents Word from opening it is essentially you've quarantined it.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And we store it in a safe quarantined area on the endpoint so that the analyst can then pull it off, delete it completely, or restore it if needed.
Right. Or pull it back for forensic purposes.
Exactly right. And what's really interesting, you mentioned the forensic side, is not only do we give you the fact that, okay, this thing was malicious and we flagged it and quarantined it, but we also provide the analyst with the forensic details about why we identified that file as malicious, not only in the score, but also in the details that you can pull down from our alert view to view that information. And then there's that's the demo essentially, right? We identified the macro as malicious using our machine learning model. We've quarantined it. We've given you the information here to identify the origin of that attack. How did it come in? Obviously, this was a mail delivery system. We're using the mail client here. Kind of the next logical question that an analyst is going to ask is, well, wow, where else is this file? And so we have the ability with Endgame to do that really easily. And for really users of any skill level using Artemis, and this is our machine learning, sorry, not our machine learning, but our AI assistant, Artemis, that understands natural language. and you can formulate a question in plain English and ask them. We also have guided response playbooks that we have that are in here. So it knows the context of where I am, and based on where I am, I can say, something like search for this file across all my endpoints. Tell me where else it might be. And what it's going to do is go out and query the endpoints and say, okay, where else might this file exist? And once it identifies where that exists, and we had the slide on SOAR earlier, you can use either this platform endgame or orchestrate through your SOAR platform. We have partnerships with Phantom, Demisto, et cetera, to do full remediation. Identify where that file is. Maybe it's still sitting on the email on the Exchange server, delete it from the Exchange server. Once you identify everywhere else that file is, and you can see where we get the list of everywhere else in this demo environment that I have where that file exists in plain English. So, we talk about this a lot in the security industry, the skills gap that we have trying to hire well-trained professionals to be on our security teams and working in the SOC or on our advanced hunt or IR teams. It's hard to find those people, which is why we built the plain English search capabilities within Artemis, our chatbot.
That's really cool. I'll be honest, Braden, I didn't understand how useful that chatbot Artemis was until you just showed me that example right there. That was a great example of it working really well. It's hard to conceptualize because I think it's because when a lot of us security professionals go to a website and we're just looking at a vendor, you get that ridiculous AI chatbot that comes up that's like, oh, how can I help you, right? And we lump everything in that category. But that was an example of an AI chatbot actually helping in a security incident response process. So that was awesome.
It's kind of funny you mentioned that. When we were doing, our research on how we wanted to build this thing, we spent a lot of time on websites like, the Verizons of the world or those guys that have this fancy version of Clippy that pops up and allows you to type some questions, has a hard time understanding what you're asking, and then eventually you just get fed up and try to call somebody. Yeah. But to learn from those now, different use case, trying to maybe sell you something or troubleshooting, but very similar application. So definitely learn from those guys, and our research team spent a lot of time ensuring that Artemis worked in the way that users within the security industry expect it to work.
Right.
And the nice thing about this is it's not only detecting and doing some level of protection and prevention up front, but now allowing analysts to get the forensics data and then go mitigate all in the same platform is really nice, because you may not have some of these other tools in your environment. So the ability to detect it, prevent it at one endpoint, but then also potentially clean it up where the infection is elsewhere is just really nice to have all in one central place.
Yeah, we truly live the words of endpoint protection platform, being able to prevent things outright, identify and detect suspicious behaviors that are happening in your environment, and giving the tools to your analysts sitting on the platform to respond to those and do full enterprise remediation like we saw here in a couple of clicks.
That's fantastic. I'm impressed. And when I go quietly and I don't have questions, it usually means that was pretty impressive and comprehensive. Braden, Matt, do you have any questions or comments? Comments from the audience as well?
I just want to say to the audience and to you guys, Paul, Matt, for having me on today. I really appreciate the chat.
Yes, it was awesome. I loved the entire discussion, and I think that this is a gap. I think this is going to frustrate a lot of attackers and penetration testers. I know that John Strand and I from Black Hills Information Security, he leads a large pen test team, and certainly malicious documents have always been in play, and it seems like you can always find some application within an Office suite where it's installed locally that you're able to slip in these malicious documents. So I think that's really been a gap for some time, and it's nice to see that now there's some protection on the endpoint for that, because I think our protections before were extremely weak, which is why we see attackers and pen testers alike using this methodology. Where that kind of gets overshadowed, right, is if you're using Office 365 or Google Docs, those are harder to have macros in that do stuff. Is that true, Braden?
Yeah, because those are, everything theoretically in those resides on on those cloud applications,
Right.
right? However, they all have the ability to pull down the file to work in offline mode, and so that's an attack vector that still can be used and be very effective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you still have to download it, and you still have to open it potentially on the local machine. So
that's right.
Right. Yeah, and we do this part of our business processes a lot of times too, right? We'll all collaborate on a document because it's in the Google Docs system, but someone may have to download it and then email it to someone else, right? Because you don't want to share it out. It's all about, data privacy, so that's a concern. Also, there's the attack vector of like wherever you get a document from, whether it be thumb drive, whether it be like 8 million other ways to get a document. This affords you the protection from that, so that's really cool too. Awesome. I don't think the audience has any questions, at least. Okay, John says there are no questions. If you do have questions, comments, is that the last slide?
That was for
me.
It
was questions. Okay. If there's no questions, that means we covered them all, Paul.
Yeah, I think so. If you do have questions, you can of course reach out to Endgame. Do you guys have like a contact form or an email or something?
Yeah, just go to our website and you can fill out the contact form there. It's www.endgame.com or email directly at demo@endgame.com.
Make sure you tell them you heard about it on Security Weekly.
Okay. No attachments in those emails.
No attachments in those emails. If you have any questions for us at Security Weekly about this content or how to get the slides, psw@securityweekly.com. We can help you out. Everyone who registered for this webcast will get a link to the high definition video in addition to the slides as well. So we'll be sending that email out shortly. So thank you, Braden, and thank you, Matt, for participating today. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.